Okay, so what if a fraud case in Minnesota, a huge diplomatic deal in the Middle East, and a military collapse over in Somalia weren't actually random, unconnected events? A really compelling new paper, the Red Sea Pincer, makes the case that they're all part of a single, incredibly audacious strategy. So let's dive in and break down its explosive thesis. Right from the start, the paper frames this as a puzzle. It asks a pretty wild question. What on earth could connect a multi-billion-dollar fraud case in Minnesota, a historic diplomatic pivot by Israel, and a sudden budget crisis in Somalia? I mean, on the surface, absolutely nothing. But the author argues these events aren't just linked. They are calculated, deliberate moves in a much larger strategic game. So let's lay out the three main pieces. First, you've got a financial crackdown in the United States that basically chokes off the flow of money from the Somali diaspora. Second, a geopolitical earthquake. Israel does something huge and formally recognizes the breakaway Republic of Somaliland. And third, the direct consequence, the sudden catastrophic financial collapse of a key regional military. The whole point of the paper is that these are not coincidences. They're dominoes, and they were deliberately pushed over. All right, let's tackle the first piece of this puzzle, what the paper calls the financial siege. The argument here is that a U.S. domestic policy, which was officially all about fighting fraud, was actually the first arm of a massive geopolitical pincer movement. Now, the mechanism for this whole siege was, surprisingly subtle. The paper points to a U.S. law, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA. It slapped what seems like a tiny 1% tax on cash remittances. But here's the thing. The analysis claims this small tax had a massive chilling effect. It wasn't about the 1%. It was about the new layer of surveillance that came with it, creating a deep fear that every dollar sent home was now being watched. And the impact? It was immediate and absolutely devastating. According to the paper's data, the amount of money sent from Minnesota to Somalia just plummeted by nearly 40%, almost overnight. This wasn't just a small dip. It was a financial shockwave that cut off a critical lifeline for an entire region. And to really get why this was so effective, you have to understand something called Hawala networks. Just think of them as these informal money transfer systems built completely on trust. For the Somali diaspora, they are the economic backbone. The paper argues that these new U.S. policies, dressed up as fraud prevention, essentially criminalize this entire system. All of a sudden, essential money sent to support family was being labeled as potential laundered fraud proceeds. But get this, it wasn't just a financial attack. It was political too. The author uses this incredible phrase, a tactical lobotomy. At the exact same time the financial squeeze was happening, the U.S. also ended temporary protected status, or TPS, for Somalis. This move instantly swamped community leaders with legal battles to avoid deportation, creating what the paper calls a lobbying vacuum in Washington. It basically silenced any political opposition at the most crucial moment possible. So now let's pivot to the other side of the globe. Because while all this financial pressure was building from the west, a second pincer was closing in from the east. The paper calls this the Red Sea pivot, and it was about to fundamentally redraw the map of the entire region. And listen to how fast this all went down. December 26, 2025, Israel makes its historic announcement recognizing Somaliland. Just a few days later, its foreign minister is on the ground in Hargeisa. And then, almost immediately, a major U.S. senator publicly backs the deal. Bang, bang, bang. This sequence signals, according to the paper, a quiet American approval for the whole play. So, what was the deal exactly? The paper calls it a classic security for legitimacy swap. It's pretty straightforward. Israel gave Somaliland the one thing it's been desperate for over 30 years, official recognition as a country. And in return, Somaliland gave Israel what it desperately needed, strategic military access right on the Red Sea, including prime locations for signals intelligence, or SIGINT, and advanced drone bases. This whole move leads to the paper's idea of a proxy doctrine. The author argues that the U.S. achieved all its goals without any political blowback by just letting Israel take the lead. The official silence from Washington wasn't seen as being indecisive or inactive. No, as the quote says, everyone in the region read that silence for what it was, a big green light. Okay, now we get to the climax of the paper's entire argument. This is where it all comes together. This section shows how that financial siege from the west and the diplomatic pivot from the east met in the middle, converging on one specific target, the Somali state of Puntland, and engineering its collapse. And the numbers here are just stark. The paper lays out data showing an immediate 32.4% budget reduction for Puntland from one year to the next. That's not a trim, that's a fiscal cliff. The paper calls it a black hole for a reason. It was created almost instantly by that financial lockdown in Minnesota, which starved the regional government of its main source of money. And you know who the biggest victim of this budget crisis was? Puntland's military, the Dervish Force. With no money coming in, the government couldn't pay its 15,000 soldiers. This salary drought, as the paper calls it, basically crippled Puntland's ability to defend itself at the exact moment its rival, Somaliland, was getting a huge infusion of advanced military gear from Israel. The timing was just devastatingly perfect. This kicks off a complete security meltdown, a total cascade of failures. The central government in Mogadishu feels totally betrayed by all this, right? So they lash out and canceled their security deals with the UAE. But wait, the UAE was the one propping up Puntland. So boom, the UAE pulls everyone out of the main airbase. Then, funding for the maritime police force is cut. And just like that, a massive critical security vacuum opens up overnight. So all of this leads to the paper's final and honestly most provocative conclusion. It argues that what we all witnessed wasn't just chaos. It was the deliberate creation of a brand new regional order through a policy that it calls managed fragmentation. So what in the world is managed fragmentation? Well, it's the idea of just giving up on the decades-long international project of building a single, unified Somali state. Instead, this new doctrine says, let's favor a security setup based on empowering smaller, more capable local partners, like an independent Somaliland, to achieve our specific strategic goals. This creates a brand new reality on the ground, what the paper calls a two Somalias. On one side, you have the official government in Mogadishu, still holding on to that one Somalia idea, with backing from Turkey and Qatar. But on the other side, you have this new, very powerful axis connecting Somaliland with Israel and the UAE, an axis that is seen as way more aligned with American and Israeli security interests in the Horn of Africa. And this final quote from the paper really brings the whole argument into sharp focus. The author is asserting that the instability and the fragmentation we've seen, it's not a policy failure. It is the policy, a deliberate state of what's called managed volatility, designed to weaken certain players while elevating others to serve as new security anchors. And that leaves us with the huge question posed by this entire analysis. If this paper's thesis is even close to correct, is this strategy of managed fragmentation some kind of pragmatic new model for bringing stability to volatile places? Or is it a really dangerous precedent that could unravel the very idea of the nation-state as we know it?